In this video, we're going to start learning how to use MATLAB and some of the more standard programming constructs we know, like the if statement and looping. Now, I'm going to go back to the file called grades.txt, and if you remember, I'll just put it up here. Here is grades over here, and it's a bunch of grades. They were randomly made. Remember, these are not actual student grades, and they're between 0 and 100. And so the first thing I'm going to do is just read it into my MATLAB window here, and I'll clear the screen, and let's take a look. So I've in fact read in my grades. Let's just clear that screen again. Now, if you remember, the mean of this data was actually around 50.5, so let's just check it. And again, I can do that in the command window. Just type in mean of grades, and it's 50.4. So now, let's say that what I want to do is check. If the mean is less than 60, for example, let's go ahead and increase everyone's grade by 10. Let's say the final was really hard, and we want to increase everyone's grade. So I'm going to do this in my script just to show you. The syntax for a MATLAB if statement is a little bit different from you're used to in C++ and maybe other programming languages, but there's a lot of similarities. So let's take a look at the syntax. I begin with the word if, and I can put things in brackets if I want to, so I'm going to, just like in C++. And now what am I looking for? Well, if the mean of the data is less than 60. So I can call the function mean on grades, and if that is less than 60, so far it looks a lot like a C++ construct. But now what I'm going to do, I don't have curly brackets. Instead, what I have is an end statement. So if this is true, then we're going to do something, and then we end it. And what am I going to do is increase everyone's grade by 10. So to do that, I say grade equals grades plus 10. OK, so I'm going to do this. We're going to look at our grades, and you're going to notice there's a problem, which is that some people's grades actually are above 100. We're going to fix that in one line. I'm going to show you something really quite remarkable with MATLAB. So I'm going to run it, and it runs perfectly fine. There are no issues. And now if I type in grades, though, into my command window and look at my data, I have some issues. For example, these last two people here have grades that are above 100. Now, I could loop through every single value and use an if statement using, say, a for loop, but MATLAB isn't really great at looping because it has some incredible constructs where it is dealing with this all at once. Let's take a look. So I'm going to use something called logical indexing, or vectorization, although vectorization means something much more general. So I want to change every grade in the vector grades that is above 100, and it makes sense to cap it at 100 because of, say, the grades in a course. So watch how I do this, and then I'll unpack the syntax of it. I say grades, and I open up my brackets as though I'm indexing the vector. And now I want MATLAB to find for me where those grades are above 100. So I say grades at grades greater than 100 equals 100. So in just one line, I was able to choose all those grades and set them equal to 100. Let's run it, let's look, and then let's unpack that. So I run it. If I look now at grades, remember I'm keeping this up for a reason. These last two were above 100. Let's see what they are now. And you'll see they're equal to 100, exactly as I asked MATLAB to do. OK. Oops, sorry, I don't want to save that. So to unpack this, what's going on here? This is telling MATLAB, take the vector called grades, and then look for all of those entries in this vector that are greater than 100, and set them equal to be the number 100. So I've simultaneously obtained a vector of indices, these are the indices, and set it equal to 100. Now let's take a look at what this does. What if I went to the command window and said grades greater than 100 and hit enter? What do I see? In this case, it'll have to be greater than or equal to because, again, I've already changed them. And so I have a bunch of zeros and ones. Now, if you remember in computer programming in C++, 0 would correspond to false, and anything else, typically 1, would correspond to true. So what MATLAB is actually doing under the hood is first going through that vector and creating a whole new vector of zeros and ones. And then it's looping through that and saying every time you see a 1, set this grade equal to 100. So it's really remarkable. It's really, really fast. Okay. So let's now say, though, that I didn't know how to logically index, or that the logical indexing was far too complex. Let's say I wanted to check for those grades that are bigger than 100, but not in the first 50, and a bunch of other things, and I just don't want to deal with logical indexing. Is it possible to do a loop? And in fact, it is. So what I'm going to do first is just comment that out. And let's do a for loop that essentially replicates this line. So remember, for loops, I know how big my data is, and luckily, since it's already read in, I do. And MATLAB has very similar constructs to C++, but again, because MATLAB has a different syntax, you're going to notice some differences. So let's just make sure it's clear. We are now loop through the data. And I'm going to start with the keyword for. And now I put a bracket just because, again, I'm familiar with it and I want to make sure everything is contained. And now I say something a little weird. For I equals 1 colon length grades. So what does this do? It actually creates a new vector called I. And it starts at 1. It goes up to the length of grades, which is the number of elements in grades indexed from 1. So it'll be 154 if you remember from previous videos. And you'll notice I don't have anything in here. I could have done in steps of 1 to the length of grades, but the default behavior is to do it in 1. So I don't need to, so I'll take it out. Okay. And again, like the if statement, the for loop must end with an end statement. So I type in end. And now inside of this, I can do everything that I could do in C++, in loops and everything else. Let's just bring it up so you can see a bit more. And then what am I really doing? Well, if grades at I now, so now I'm not logically indexing, is greater than 100, then grades at I equals to 100. And again, I end it. So now I have a nested if statement. I have a for loop. I have all that sort of stuff. And what we're going to see is if I run it again, so let's give this a run. And I want to take a look, and you'll see that at the end we do in fact have exactly what we had before. So we have now read the file, and we call grades. And as you can see, the last two elements, as before, are set to 100 after the adjustment. So the for loop works as well. The downside in MATLAB, though, is that a loop is actually very computationally expensive. You want to avoid them if you can. And that's why logical indexing is so great, because when you're dealing with, say, a gigabyte of data, suddenly looping through it is going to take a lot longer than just doing a logical indexing. And that's because of how MATLAB works under the hood. There's nothing you can do about that. That's just how MATLAB works. And so if it's at all possible to avoid using a for loop, you should go ahead and do that.